Hey guys, super excited to talk about this. If you're an actor, you're a writer, director, filmmaker, theater maker, you have to check out adult film. This is not some sort of porn thing. This is a unique training center built for actors, writers, and directors of all levels. With a mission to empower working class artists, adult film offers affordable, peer-led classes that focus on both artistic growth and practical skills for theater and TV film. We love adult film at Creative Risk. In fact, we did a podcast with them, with Ryan Sherwanko and David Gerlich a few months back. I think it's a phenomenal episode just to get their ethos, their values. And I've had the pleasure of performing at their theater in Bushwick. I mean, and I say this with no bullshit, it's one of the most vibrant artistic communities forming now in New York City, and they are making some truly awesome and immediate stuff over there. They have some upcoming classes that you guys should be aware of. There's Dramatic Improv and Sense Memory with David Gerlich on January 22nd. On-Camera Acting Workshop with Welker White, January 25th through the 26th. A Playwriting Workshop with Lucy Thurber, February 1st to the 2nd. And this is really cool, a Generative Writing and Directing class with Tina Satter, February 22nd through the 23rd. So these are some incredible artists. Take advantage of discounts for multiple classes if you sign up for multiple ones and join a thriving artistic community designed to sustain your craft and inspire your creative soul. Sign up now at adultfilm.nyc or go ahead and follow at adultfilm.nyc for updates. Check them out.
Do you know someone who's been thinking about taking some private guitar, piano, or voice lessons? Maybe even you? A little one in your life, a friend? Look no further, because Lesson with Luke, which is a collective of teaching artists who specialize in private music lessons for students ages 3+, has got you covered. And it's founded by my friend Luke Smith. I went to school with him, actually. And actually, our first real collaboration together was on a production of Hedwig and the Angry Inch that I was directing. And he played guitar, maybe bass. But this is my point. He's super, super talented. Great singer, great actor, great musician. And he founded Lesson with Luke, which features excellent music teachers who are all professional artists who have worked on Broadway, off-Broadway, national tours, regional theater, television, and film. You get it. They do it all. And all their teachers bring a sense of joy to their teaching style, helping further install a lifelong love for music in their students. And before you ask, yes, they all offer virtual lessons as well as in-person lessons if you are in New York City. If you are interested, as always, you get a discount. You can reach out to Luke directly at lessonwithlukestudio@gmail.com. That is lesson singular, not lessons. So it's lessonwithlukestudio@gmail.com. And make sure you mention the Creative Risk podcast in order to receive your first 3 lessons at 30% off.
First off, everyone needs to listen to your podcast. I think you guys are probably my most favorite industry podcast out there, because you guys really teach actors how to actually be entrepreneurs, how to actually market themselves. So I also do feel like every actor should think of themselves as a business person.
Hey all, Mike here. Before we get started with today's episode, I just want to ask you to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell below us if you're watching on YouTube. Or be sure you follow us on your favorite podcast listening app, if that's your preferred way of engaging with the podcast. And if you're feeling extra generous, leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. We read them all, even the bad ones. So leave a review there. Lastly, if you enjoy Creative Risk and you want to dive deeper, consider joining our Patreon community. We offer 3 membership tiers starting at just $5. As a member, you're going to get early access to ad-free episodes, weekly motivational content, bonus full-length episodes, and much more, including a book club. Come on. But it's more than just content. You'll be a part of a community dedicated to accountability and support, helping you stay motivated and inspired. So head over to patreon.com/Creative Risk Podcast. Check out the description below for that link and sign up today.
Sounds like you also realized it too.
Well, no, I don't know. maybe. I don't know. I think it's a good movie. I don't know. I think it's and they killed him. They killed him after he made it. No, I'm just joking.
I thought The Shining is amazing.
Yeah, that's a good one. I love Kubrick.
I just didn't really like
2001: Space Odyssey,
and I didn't really like Nicole Kidman.
I think she's interesting. I mean, it's a style. It's surreal. That's my excuse.
It's not that I don't get it, but I'm just anyway. Just my opinion. My opinion.
How are you
but
feeling
I
about
really
today's episode? Are you like panicking?
No, because you're leading the charge, and I think there's lots of interesting ideas here. And I have a lot of questions. Like, I want examples,
Yes.
and some might be there and some might not, but I'm not stressed
Sure.
about it. I think it's an interesting point. And you saw that I changed the title.
I did. Well,
It's simple to understand.
I guess a first question I have. This whole episode is going to be about Trump, basically, but it's going to be about the framing of the episode is what artists can learn from Trump's win. That is sort of what we're going to be examining today.
Mm-hmm.
And the first question I have is initially nearly 2 weeks ago, almost 2 weeks ago now, right? It was
12 days.
So what? I know. You see, you have like your doomsday clock. 12 days.
I just know November 6th is election day.
What were your initial reactions, thoughts, as somebody who is very in tune to sort of like some narratives around, you watch a lot of CNN, and what was your initial reactions, thoughts to Trump's win? What did you think? What was your first reaction?
Well,
Like
I'm going to answer this in two ways, and I'm going to be I'm going to be honest. I'm not going to lie to you. So my first, when I realized it was happening the night before, in the moment around 10 p.m., when I realized it was 2016 all over again, I was surprised. I was surprised for all the reasons that we've talked about many times, because I think he is an absolute psychopath. So I have so I always have to give the caveat. I have no problem with different ideals, conservative values. I have no problem with people thinking differently. I have no problem with Republicans winning. Republicans should be in power too, because there should be a balance of power. I was surprised, and then even more surprised that he, for example, won the popular vote by 4.5 million votes. That it was such a defiant win. But then I'll tell you the second reaction that I had. And it's still sort of in this moment, and I'm sort of coming to terms with it. And we went and saw The Apprentice the other day too.
How was that?
Fine, good, not bad. I mean, I wouldn't see it again. A little boring, but I think it's because, to your point, I've tracked and learned so much about his life and his journey that none of it was really new to me. I thought Jeremy Strong was great as Roy Cohn. But I'm going to say this, and Michael, because we had a conversation about it afterwards, and it kind of relates to your question about what were my thoughts. And the truth is that I really believe that Trump is a byproduct of capitalism in every sense of the word. He has played the game of capitalism probably better than most people we know, and it is the underlining value of American society, and people dream of. I'm going to be a bit general, and this is I don't want to use these words too provocatively, but people dream, I think, of cheating the system, whether that's paying less in taxes or winning the game of capitalism and making the most money and da da da. That's just who we are. Even those of us who try to fight against it in some ways. And again, I don't mean to speak for everybody. So for those of you listening, being like, that's not me. Okay, great, it's not you. But I'm saying that that's part of society. And therefore,
So you're saying part
Mike,
of the appeal is sort of that he has, because it's capitalism. You're saying it's like he's somebody who has worked for him self-interestedly and has taken advantage of our system.
yeah.
And basically the fact that he's sort of this not I wouldn't say grifter maybe, but like, the part of the appeal is this sort of like I won this game, period.
Well, and I want to be honest with you about something that I'm coming to terms with. I was reading the paper. I usually I get the New York Times and I read it usually in the morning when I'm up early enough to have an hour to do so. And one of the things I'm getting annoyed with is actually, interestingly enough, I'm bored with the attacks on Trump. And so where's that taking me to, Mike? I think, and it kind of relates to this episode, I am curious about his potential. I'm curious about what he's been able to do. I'm curious about what so many people see in him and what they value in him, and I want to give him a chance again. And again, I guess I'm speaking very openly right away, and even as I say it, I'm a little nervous because people hate him so much. But
well, don't you want? I mean, yes, I am not a Trump fan at all.
Yeah, right.
But I think what's that guy's name? I know sports, not Sam Shepard Smith. No,
Sam Shepard.
Charlemagne. No, Charlemagne the God.
Charlemagne the God
went on a show and he was like, "Look, I didn't vote for him. I didn't want him to win, but don't we want him to succeed? Like, he's our president. So it's like, don't we want if he don't? He's like, we don't we want him to be successful in some way?"
Well, that, and I guess what I'm trying to say is have I been so caught up in the liberal bubble? The liberal, to your point about CNN, have I been, even though I like to think that I diversify my intake, have I been so caught up in the ideals, values, opinions of actually so many other people that I haven't really seen the forest for the trees with Trump? So that's my long-winded answer.
I think that's a really interesting and gracious thing to say. And by the way, that is going to be the final point I sort of make in this episode. Is
bye, guys.
Bye. But look, you and I do not like Donald Trump. I do not think that he is good. He's a good representative for the country, a good leader for I don't think that. And the reason why I'm excited for today's episode is because there is a lot to glean from this moment for us as artists. And I'm going to say up front that this is not going to be a take that most, especially actors and liberal artists, are not going to discuss this take. Those takes are valuable too. I'm not going to sit here and say that sexism, racism, whatever, if homophobia did not play a part in all of this in some capacity. But it's like astrology, right? It's like,
but if I may, I would argue to the point of the xenophobia and racism. I think we could argue that that's baked into capitalism too. I mean, the United States of America in many ways was quite literally built on slavery in some ways. And so I am saying that though, because I actually think the real culprit here isn't Donald Trump. Isn't the Republicans or Democrats or even the liberal media versus, I think it's capitalism, and that continues to rear its head.
That's
and
an interesting. I'm curious. Maybe we'll get to this more discussion because 100 years ago we were in a very similar position in terms of the immigrant, and it's amazing how we don't learn much from history. There was a lot more crime back then with immigrant crime and violence in the streets, and prohibition was basically an anti-immigrant measure. But, there was certain, and so like, I don't know how people can't look today whose grandparents came here 100 years ago and see the similarities. That's disturbing. But, also there were certain implementations that happened to help these people assimilate better, and their cultures didn't go away. There was some, it's like, but it's amazing how we don't learn from history. And the reason why this episode's important to me, and like the reason why I bring up the racism, the sexism, is there's a million frameworks through which you can view this. There's a million frameworks through which you can view this election, whether it's from the race angle, a gender angle, a whatever angle. But this is an angle that I don't think a lot of people in our circles are talking about. Bernie kind of talked about it a little bit. And so I want to offer this take because I think this take is also very informative for our business. Yeah. So that's why I want to set up this context. And the context, to get right to it, kind of what I was saying is, in my personal opinion, I think that history moves in cycles. So we have repeat patterns. And we are in a very specific macro historical cycle, which I would say is technocracy versus populism, right? So we are moving away from a technocratic system, and I'm going to define these terms in a second, and a technocratic system into a populist system. So what is technocracy? Technocracy is the governance. It means governance by experts and specialized bureaucrats. So in short, big government, right? Not only big government, but, specifically, an emphasis on filling government agencies with people who are experts in those fields, right? So you can trace this if, and I do think that history moves in 100-year cycles. I think the last big sort of transformation of American society was FDR's New Deal, right? So what was FDR's New Deal? It was in the middle of the Great Depression. Wall Street was completely unregulated, did whatever the fuck they want. They bankrupted the whole fucking country, right? And the world, really, because that had lasting effects. And so what FDR did, when he ran against, I think it was Herbert Hoover, was basically he said the government needs to step in and save the country, basically. And the way we are going to do that is by stimulating economic growth and stimulating, really empire building with the largesse of government. So this period of time is really known as, the alphabet soup. That's what it's kind of known as, where all of these different, whether it's the Security Exchange Commissions or the Federal Housing Authority, all of these agencies and then all these sort of bureaucratic arch agencies were set up, right? The Writers Project or whatever, and the Radio Project. And it was all coming from the government, right? So the government had all these initiatives, agencies to sort of stimulate economic growth again, right? And one thing to say,
needed and very successful.
Needed and successful. And
that's just an important point to make to yes, keep going.
No, I think it's a good point. However you define success, right? So in terms of growing the American empire,
getting the Great Depression.
Getting the Great Depression, getting us through the Great Depression, getting us through World War II. Another important thing to note is that this was also around the time that a lot of intelligence agencies were set up. We're also kind of CIA, FBI, NSA. So one thing I have to say about all of this is all of these agencies, the mantra was that, they were mainly controlled and staffed by Ivy League educated members of upper society, right? So people who went to Harvard, people went to Princeton, people, and it was the best of the best, right? And who were all educated at the same places, especially even the intelligence agencies, it was similar. And that's who controlled these agencies, right, is these so-called experts.
Well, when you say so-called experts, just to say, because I think this is going to come up.
I'm putting
again,
in quotation marks, by the way.
No, exactly. And well, that's what I'm responding to, because I don't want to jump the gun here, but I just want to say, I think it's probably it's probably a good assumption that these people were in fact experts. Now meaning experts, meaning they've studied and understood
absolutely
their specific field of study, right?
Right. I mean, we're going to get to sort of the pros and cons of each of these sort of systems, but, absolutely, these people have dedicated, their time and energy towards specific topics, whether it's, foreign policy, whether it's economics, whether it's whatever. And so you would assume that,
so I think it's safe to say that they're experts.
Well, here's where I want to, yes, because, and I'll jump right to it. The problem with a technocratic system, one of the main problems is what's called iterative feedback, right? Because all of these people are educated in the same places. They all have the same beliefs, and they're not willing to.
There's no diversity of opinion.
There's no diversity of opinion, number one.
Sure.
Number two, think about how universities, education, this is really where the rise of the college education started, because there was such a clear ladder of, I go get this degree, I get that degree, that really is sort of irrelevant in real world practical experience. But there's all of these bureaucratic institutions set up. And by the way, this doesn't just extend to government agencies. I would argue that this extends to, media, right? It's like the buildup of sort of like all of these media companies and their subsidiaries, nonprofits, sort of these sprawling organizations. And it used to be that you would graduate and there was a very clear ladder you would climb in your specialized gender studies major, right? But the problem with this is that, we'll talk about why this is going away, but the only thing you understand is the ladder.
Right.
You don't understand. You don't have any lateral thinking or creative thinking to see outside of sort of like, it's like the equivalency of an actor is like, I go to conservatory, I get an agent, I get a co-star. You can't see outside of sort of these institutionally set up ladders.
Right.
So it's sort of like this iterative feedback loop. So it's hard. That's why I say so-called experts, is not because they aren't informed and educated and highly informed, educated in their fields, but they're often stuck and can't really think creatively past these bureaucracies. And
I just want to say that to my point about what I'm getting annoyed with in the media is, like, for example, is Matt Gaetz as Attorney General crazy ass choice? Of course, that is fucking insane. I mean, it's again, I do come back to character, and it is widely reported that he's a bit of a scumbag, if not, a sexual abuser, inclusive of minors. But just to say that whether it's Musk, Tulsi Gabbard, Gates, even RFK, what Trump is doing, to your point, is, and I think where I'm like, well, let's see what we got, is all these anti-establishment outsiders exactly coming in. And do they represent the people more, which might take us into this populism?
And do they potentially represent innovation? Is there, because you can't innovate within sort of a structure. I mean, I don't know. I like Tulsi Gabbard a lot. I like RFK a lot. I not fans of a lot of the other people, but is there a chance when you're pulling from the outside, more creative thinking? As you and I both know, just to kind of take it trained actors are some of the most least creative people when it comes to business practices.
Right.
Because they are stuck within what they view as sort of like this clear step-by-step linear ladder, right?
Yeah.
But let's talk about
Interestingly enough,
popular.
though, side note, just one note about that kind of relates to this point. You always hear me say that I do think artists are kind of bizarrely poised to be some of the best entrepreneurs in the world. And meaning if they were to reframe it to your point about being an outsider, I do think
that's right.
We have skills that are directly applicable and actually could help us succeed even more if
100%. If somebody is willing to not play the game to an extent. But let's talk about populism.
The game as we know it. Yes.
The game as we know it.
Yeah.
Populism. So populism is basically, if technocracy is the belief of sort of specialized educated elites, who are, like I said, specialized in these areas running government. Populism is really the belief of, that it's politics rooted in the appeal of the common people against elites. So we've had many versions of populist movements in America. Andrew Jackson, ran really as the common man, like representing like rural farmers and white non-land holding people, so against sort of like the East Coast banking. I think he did something with the second bank too. So against sort of them. And then you had like even like that was in the 1820s, 30s, whatever. And the Anti-Federalists, which was like the right after, 1776, there was that was a populist movement as well against sort of this idea of big government, of like, there's going to be a group of special people who can dictate to locale state. Really what it was a pro-states movement. And it was like these elites in Washington or Philadelphia or whatever the capital was at the time shouldn't be dictating how I live my life in, my small town in, Alabama or in New Hampshire or wherever. What do they know? But what's interesting, and this is my opinion, I haven't heard anybody said this, I think that the elite being rebelled against has shifted somewhat. It used to be really against like sort of rich, like, sort of rich upper crust society. And while I think that is still the case, the elite has now become, through these bureaucratic systems, right, and specializations, which, by the way, it's like this is what FDR did too. He's like, okay, we're going to put the actors, even with the arts. Are you a writer? Here's your agency. Here's your government funded agency. Are you a radio programmer? Here's your government, right? So it's like this idea of compartmentalization and specialization, as opposed to like an executive who oversees many different things and has sort of a jack of all trades mentality. This sort of specialization has led to all of these experts. And now I believe personally that the experts represent the elite now. Think about all these climate deniers, scientists, how there's been this push against science, like, in the past 20 years. It's very similar to that. It's this idea of like,
well, I think we see it even in our industry,
100%.
where, and I think that I'm a bit of a quote unquote elitist in our industry. I would argue we both are, in terms of where we come from and what our training was and the kind of work that we do, and right, potentially our point of view about, which this is kind of my point I'm making, about seeing TikTok stars
exactly
become mainstream, and us resenting it, when in fact, and I think this is low-key maybe kind of one of the points that we're going to make today and that you might even be making now, people might be looking at us going like, oh, you're a big fancy BFA, you're so special.
What the fuck do you know? What the fuck do you know? You have a specialization in
you got
acting?
2,700. You where's your fans? I've got 2.5 million, and you've got 2,700 followers. So you tell me who the real relevant
and yeah, and it's like, and who are you? How are you aware? But it's exactly right. And that's the thing, right, about like these sort of populist movements is within the elite. They're dismissed. Think about Trump when he started. they're dismissed, they're shrugged off, they don't know anything, they don't get it, they're uneducated, da 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 da. But sure enough, when a strong populist movement happens, they often sort of reinvent sort of what the system can be. That is the hope of pop, and takes it into a more the ideal. And by the way, there are pros and cons to both. And just to briefly talk about them,
Our friends at Method Fitness get that in the entertainment world, your body is your most important tool. Whether you're an actor, a dancer, or behind the scenes, staying fit is crucial to your success. I don't think anyone would argue with that, being healthy in general. Their programs are designed specifically for creatives, helping you balance a busy career while staying in peak shape. And with Method Fitness, you get personalized training that fits into your life, virtual or in-person sessions, custom workouts, and constant support from trainers who understand your world. Or get your workouts on your phone with the Method Fitness app. Access your program and communicate with your coach on your time. Their philosophy is simple: never break. Life won't slow down, so you need a training method that keeps up. And Lord knows this industry doesn't slow down, or sometimes it does. Either way, start your 7-day free trial today and experience the fitness plan designed for artists by artists. Stay healthy, stay strong, and never miss a beat. Go to www.methodfitnessnyc.com to book a consultation.
you know, technocracy arguably comes from a more scientific and data-backed approach. It values education. You know, so these are two big pros, right? Is that it's saying like, don't just make assumptions, research, know your shit, right? I mean, it's not, and, you know, have data and science to back it up, you know. However, some of the cons are, you know, within these systems, there's so many hoops to jump through. You always hear this bureaucratic red tape. You always hear this talked about in, you know, in Washington. There's so much bureaucratic. There's a, you know, in terms of like, in order to get a, you know, the potholes fixed in my town, I have to consult with 40 different fucking people about it or whatever. Because, and by the way, one of the big beliefs on why China is beating us in a lot of ways right now is because they're much more centralized. Whereas, you know, you have to consult 8 different experts in different fields to get anything fucking done because everybody has a different opinion. So that is one of the big cons to a bloated sort of bureaucratic system. You know, also there are, you know, the common, which is true, is there's often a lack of awareness of on the ground issues. Now, I would say that Joe Biden's presidency was one of the better pro-union presidencies, or, you know, pro-labor, antitrust, a lot of things. But what was fascinating, right, and where the Democratic Party still does not understand is messaging. They still don't understand how to get that message out there. And
I need to say something about this in relation to populism for a minute, because I do think something else is at play here that really needs to just be considered as we talk about this. You know, there's two massive themes in my life that sort of inform so much of what we explore in this cast, but just that I think about. That is late stage capitalism, as I was saying, and the other is social media. And the reason I say it is because, and maybe we'll talk about Trump's use of alternative forms of media as a messaging tool. But I do also think that to that same idea of the iterative communication patterns that come out of, you know, elitists running, well, the same echo chambers, I would argue, are true on socials. And not only that, the spread of misinformation. And so it's fascinating because, you know, does a modern day populist state actually represent the people, or
exactly
is it really a fight for who can inform or misinform quicker.
I think this is one of the big cons of populism, is oftentimes, I mean, I would argue that, when we talk about sort of the power elite, and the draining the swamp, right? Trump has put people, his first administration, especially, who represent a lot of corporate interests. Not that the Democratic Party does not have major corporate interests invested in it. That's why they squashed Bernie Sanders. But Trump was draining potentially, or what the messaging was the bureaucratic DC swamp. But, putting Elon Musk, who, by the way, I think probably does have some valuable things to offer, in my personal opinion. He's the most innovative man on the planet, one could argue, for a reason, and the richest man on the planet for a reason. But like putting him in charge of putting him, even though he's not in a government agency, it's like a private quasi-government, he's still government efficiency, but it's not technically a government agency. It's like a private. It's not. But I say this because, that's not Lou Bruni, who lives across the street from my parents, who's an electrician.
Right.
That's a fucking elite of his own.
Right.
Of his own. So it's like, oftentimes these populist messages, and this is what Democrats are beating, I think, not to their advantage. You're being fucked. You're being taken advantage of. You're voting against your own interests. But low-key, I do believe that that's true, from an economic standpoint. I think that they are voting against their own economic interests in a lot of ways, but that is one of the big cons of populism.
Well, listen, part of what's at the core of that, though, is, and you and I've talked about this, and you, I think, are a great example of this, a lack of trust in the establishment government as we know it.
As there should be, in my opinion.
You think there should be a lack of trust?
Of course.
Well, wait. Sorry. You mean that there's good reason to be
good reason?
That's different than what I'm saying is should be. We should ideally be trusting that the federal government has the citizens' interest in consideration. And yet, part of, to your point, Musk represents another citizen who played the game of capitalism better than most people and
Sure.
won. And so one could assume, well, he must have our better interests at heart than people who are career politicians and have been, running the game.
Which is not true, I would argue. Although, it's funny. I do think that, well, we could talk about Musk another time, but, one of the other big pros of populism, or a big pro, we haven't said really a pro yet. We basically just said that it could be used to be taken advantage. You can take advantage of people with populist sort of rhetoric. But look, what do people in Congress or the House of Representatives know about local issues? What do they really understand about local issues in, some town in Wyoming? What do they understand? And part of, I think, a pro of a con of populism is what we're talking about, sort of these let's have studies. Let's have these experts who are not even fucking there, not even of the people, not even local representatives or community members.
Well, what do you
sort
mean?
of have think tanks?
That's the gig. Meaning, this is where I'm just like, I'm not saying all reps do this, but someone who's in Congress, someone who's in the House of Representatives,
ideally represents the.
Ideally is going back and doing town halls and talking with the people. And I know that as the higher you climb, of course, from Senate especially onwards, you're going to. You're going to be less available to the people. But I would argue that your local congressperson should, in fact, be engaging with the community in a way that they do understand and represent.
I agree, but the way these DC bubble, but the way these sort of DC bubbles are set up, right? Is that like a lot of times they're not pulling on the expertise of their own citizenry, of their own constituents, and instead relying on think tanks, and also what's the party line on these issues, or what sort of, what's the in terms of, because I have this ladder, I become a congressman, then I become this, then I become a president or whatever the fuck, or I get a cabinet position, is a lot of times there's really there's a vote, which is, all we have, but there isn't much.
Yeah, I hear that.
Accountability to the people. And instead you're being more accountable to sort of the DC game of politics. So much of it is, let's negotiate about getting this provision in this budget bill or in this defense act or whatever, and you're hobnobbing within your own fucking elite DC bubble. And this all relates to entertainment.
Just to make the thing about capitalism again, the reason why this all relates, in my opinion, is because why? Well, they're trying to hold on to power because it's equivalent with money, and so the government is a business like every other business, and they're trying to make sure that they if in the Democrats' instance, I would argue for the most part, sans Bernie, but I would argue even a little bit Bernie, they fall right in line with the establishment to keep their job because money, power. Just to say, because it's an industry like every other industry,
Sure. Which, what is the point of having it if it's going to be like everything else to an extent,
and not be public service, which is what
and
it
not
should
be public service. What's the point of even having it? One thing I do want to acknowledge. So, there is this sort of, ideally, this check on sort of these out of touch elites, bringing it back to the people, whatever. One thing I do want to know, which I do find interesting, and it needs to be said, and I take with this information what you will, is the greatest innovators of sort of the new American frontier are all Trumpers. Whether it's Musk, Peter Thiel, whether it's, all Bitcoin, which, whatever opinion you have, it's probably one of the most innovative things that we're trying to figure out at this moment. Silicon Valley, they chose to side with Trump. A large part of this interest is, of course, self-serving. It's deregulation. They do not, this is really the capitalism piece too, to me, is that they do not want the government to regulate, their businesses, what the sort, and also the government wants to have basically shared control of the markets, of the institutions. They don't want to, free market capitalism, which the conservatives, I would argue, are not really for that either. They give government contracts to all these people, whatever the fuck. But, there's a belief that the government is holding us back from this new sort of era of American society, which, is definitely so they can make more money. One can argue that, but also to look on another angle. Look, what do we export? What do we have? What does America have to offer? China has taken all of our fucking industries, and they are the number one purveyor of, our exporter of goods. They are the ones. We don't have oil. We don't have anything. So really, what from a market position and an economic position, how are we competing economically? And what these people would argue, and I'm not saying it's true, I'm just telling you what this is, something obviously I think many millions of people believe that you're not going to hear, is that to go to this next phase of American supremacy in the world, which, we can, I don't like imperialism, but we definitely, you and I talk about, we don't want to live in a world where China is number one or Russia is number one, that it's not ideal for us or our safety. But to retain American supremacy, we need to be forging into new frontiers, new markets, and the government regulating it. And by the way, the people regulating it, one could argue, what the fuck do they know? Okay, you got a law degree from Harvard. What the fuck do you know about, space exploration and me trying to, aerospace or Bitcoin, or what do you know about any of this shit? I'm the person on the ground building this shit. What do you know with your Ivy League education in your echo chamber about any of the things I'm trying to innovate from? This is the point of view. I'm not saying it's correct, but this is the point of view. And so there's a belief that this is holding these sort of bureaucratic, iterative, self-contained systems are holding us back from innovation.
Both need to be true. Like, one of the things that's unfortunate 100% about this moment is that Republicans are in complete control. I think Republicans should be disappointed by that. I'm not kidding. Because you just said it.
That's a great spin.
There's a lot to what you just said. What do you know? Well, I know a lot. I might know, I'm me being the lawyer for the person, I might know X, Y, or Z ramifications because I understand the global superpowers and their fight for, we need to find a way to whatever the fuck. My point is that this is why I have no problem with Republicans being in quote unquote ultimate power, as long as there's a checks and balances, as long as there is
100%.
There are conversations happening across the board. And that's where I am disappointed in this outcome right now, is that I worry that, I think we can all agree that Trump should be checked. I think everyone, I would even say,
sure,
maybe even Trump himself would be like, it's good for me to have some.
But let's take another angle at this. Yes, but this is now. Look, I am for checks and balances, but I think that what we are being stretched thin on, in terms of this historical moment, is this bureaucratic. How many branches of government? How many votes do you need to get? How does anything get done? How is there any sort of uniformity of vision? How is there any sort of like real leadership? I'm not saying I want to get rid of that. I'm just saying that we are experiencing the cons of that system, which is that an executive can't get things done because they have so many hoops to jump through. Yeah. With this sprawling bureaucratic machine that we've built. Yeah. And it's hard to take decisive action. So these innovators,
but maybe I would argue, shouldn't, just to say, I'm not saying that things should take 3.5 years, but okay, let me just take one of
it's
your
hard.
Topics.
Well, it's hard.
Take vaccines, right? And the pandemic. We didn't have the time, and yet I would argue that maybe part of what the argument there was that we went too fast, and that we needed to understand the full breadth of what those vaccines do. And I'm not I believe in the intention of what the vaccine was done. I'm not a conspiracy theorist that anybody was trying to hurt people with vaccines. But the point is that I'm trying to make is what you're saying, which is, we don't want an impulsive Trump being able to go, you know what, let's do this. Okay. Well, wait a second, girl. Let's just make sure that we understand the full scope of what it is.
Look, no, I'm not saying it is a good thing. I think the ideal version of government is where we have a true hybrid system. Yeah. But often time I am just making the argument as to why this has happened, because it is difficult to make, especially again, China is a centralized system, so why they're beating us on so many different fronts right now is because they can be more efficient in terms of their economic and sort of their economic and political decision making, is because they can be much more efficient. We have a lot of government waste. We have a lot of inefficiencies in our government, so it is difficult for us to innovate at the rate and the speed by which we need to be doing that.
Right.
And by the way, again, we're going to definitely talk about how this applies, but this to me is exactly what the entertainment industry is too.
Well, we should probably shift to the context more.
Yeah, let's go ahead. Because, I think it is this shift from technocracy to populism that's happening right now is absolutely tied into our business. And let me just finish the thought I was about to say, which is, how slow is Hollywood to pick up on trends, on social media, because there's such bloat, because you have 200 people working in the marketing department who all have to answer to each other, and there's hierarchical systems, but there's not people, so you're not able to innovate and fail quickly because there's too much bloat around, which is why I think a big reason why Hollywood has not, been able to solve some of the biggest problems facing it, which is, how do we get people to theaters? How do we start making money from movies again? They're still having trouble figuring out what their new chapter is going to be because there's too many experts with too many different opinions who all need to be consulted and agree upon and get a consensus on. And so it is difficult to do that. That's just one small example, but we're going to be listing some others. I don't know if you have any responses to that specifically.
I don't. No, I don't.
Obviously, the biggest way we can see this impact on the entertainment industry is obvious, which is alternative media platforms. TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, podcasts, right? Entertainment has become less of an institutional ladder. And in fact, more and more people are turning to people like them for entertainment.
Well, this is what I mean. This is what I mean. I mean, obviously social media was born out of capitalism. And not like, I say that without value judgment. I mean, like, that's just the world. I mean, social media would have come about, no matter what. So I'm not saying but they're intrinsically linked, because we see people now growing entire careers, lifestyles just through socials alone, through a different form of entertainment. Per your point about this, they're looking for people like themselves. They're looking to see. I mean, I know you do as well. I'll be watching something and then I will go to TikTok to watch Aunt D in her mental health world. Oh my God, that's my girl. I love.
Or like those, or like the Costco.
Have you seen Shayana and Bria?
No.
Mike, girl, it is so good. It's this mother raising her two autistic children. One's nonverbal. One's 30 and the other's like maybe 28. They are hysterical. This is Aunt D in my mental health world in Jesus' name. And that's exactly what it is. Stay tuned. People know what that is, and I don't come for me because I'm doing that's not my black woman voice. But or whatever
anyway, it is. If it's double the Costco guys, double chunk chocolate cookie or whatever.
Exactly.
Now, it's just fucking fascinating because very good point, as to people of the elite, the specialized class of artisans, you and I, having gone to school and appreciating the craft, what we think that people should be watching Passing Lives or whatever the fuck that movie was, or they should be watching Anatomy of a Fall, which I also fucking hated. They should be watching. That's what the masses should be taking in. They should be taking in that. Because why? Why is it? What?
Well, I'm laughing at that because I really didn't like that movie, but it's so true. Like, we really, like, what I hear you say, what I think is right. It's like Succession, right? We used to talk about this, about how, like, Succession's like the #1 show in America, but meanwhile it's like Cake Wars on Netflix. Really,
yeah, nobody watches it except fucking liberals in LA and New York.
Exactly.
And so, but again, Do you see the issue where it's like, here we are at the top of our irrelevant mountain, believing that we know what is best for people. They should not be watching, Double Chunk Chocolate Cookie or Aunt D's Mental Health World or whatever, or, those British people who eat gas station food. They should be watching, my play about whatever. That's what they should be watching. And it's this, and
let's just say something about this, because I think when we're talking about this in relation to us as artists, and the reason we're going, like, what can we learn from Trump's win is essentially, just to state the macro, we are actually becoming irrelevant.
Exactly.
And if
the original title of this episode I wanted was "Our Business is Irrelevant: What We Can Learn from Trump's Win."
Yes, exactly. But just trying to simplify it for the
of course, yeah.
Sure. No, but because what we're getting at here is that, again, we're in our own bubble, and I think this kind of gets to, like, here we had Taylor Swift is probably the number one celebrity in the world right now.
Correct.
And Taylor Swift endorsed Kamala, along with Oprah, along with Beyonce, along with George Clooney, along with. And yet, even though, I don't think I just read about this, Justin Trudeau tweeted at Taylor, hey, why don't you include some stops in Canada? And not only did Taylor Swift add 6 shows in Canada recently, but they're saying that the entire economy in Canada, huge boost just because of these 6 sold out shows. However, it still didn't translate. And that has to speak volumes in terms of this idea of relevancy with celebrity, and specifically mainstream Hollywood, we could say, and the music industry, in relation to its interest and impact in people's lives.
Well, a couple things on this point. Well, let's even look at the George Clooney, Julia Roberts ads.
I don't know what ads those are.
Well, it was a Trumpers. So it was Trumpers going to a voting place, and it was like a husband. The Julia Roberts one was like a husband and a wife. And he's like, yo, honey, make the right decision. And then Julia Roberts is like, and she's like, I will, hun. And then Julia Roberts is like, just know that your vote is yours. And he doesn't have to know that you voted for Kamala. And so think about just how fucking stupid that is. So you're trying to message to middle America to lie to your basically, unfortunately, however you want to view this, a lot of people aren't, as we have seen, abortion was not unfortunately, because I really believe that pro-choice is really important, but that's not a breaking issue. That's not as big of an issue as we thought it was to be with just because people were women. But when you message to middle America, when a Hollywood actress, multimillionaire, is messaging to a woman, hey, lie to your family and vote for who I think you should vote for. Well, how do you not realize that's going to be tone deaf?
Do you know what you're bringing up? And I don't know, I was just scanning. I don't know if this actually comes up later, but I actually think this is a huge point in relation that we as artists need to listen to. And it's this. What are the issues that people really care about?
That's a great point.
And specifically, and we're seeing this problem with the arts, where we are getting in line, telling a whole new set of the same stories. We are becoming performative a bit in our outreach and work to create progress and inclusivity. And by the way, I think you and I agree. We don't. You and we're very progressive individuals. You know, we our values, whether it's on abortion or any gender rights or women's rights, doesn't matter. You and I personally are on the same page. But to your point about the Julia Roberts thing, and it's like, well, what are these middle Americans are actually caring about? And then let me just say something, Mike. The reason why this matters in a macro sense to artists is because when you are thinking about the kind of art you are trying to make, whether you are an artistic director at a theater, or whether you are just a freelance artist trying to sell your music at a local pub, I don't give a fuck. Just be careful that we don't take our marching orders from the typically
Right.
progressive left. Again, this is not a value. This is not a value judgment on your political values, because again, I think it's clear.
No, I agree with a lot of those political values.
Exactly, but this is kind of again the point of the episode that I think this is translating into the kind of art. Let me actually, if I may, and gosh, we're some people are not going to be fans. But have you heard of, or did you see My Old Ass, the Aubrey Plaza movie? It's this. Did I finish it? I don't even know. It actually wasn't bad, except the main girl, the protagonist, it's basically she confronts her older self, played by Aubrey Plaza, who's quite good, but the girl is gay, but not, and it's a whole diverse array of characters. Beautiful, like representation, like you wouldn't believe, like very contemporary, and I'm here for it as a person. But I do think that some of this trickle down effect of the art becoming a bit neutralized because we're trying to appeal to a once progressive segment of America is actually not
well
only
to ourselves. Well, to ourselves.
There you
That's
go.
Well. Let me relate this back. I think this
and
is.
I hope I'm saying what I'm saying in a careful,
you're not
sensitive way, because
you're
I'm
not.
There's
we're not saying that there's no place for those stories.
Sure.
Nobody's saying that. But yeah. And by the way, this is a point I want to make. One thing that this election kind of proved is that for many women in America, maybe, okay, I'm going to say something, the price of milk was more important than their right to choose.
Right.
And also, if you were to go talk to, a black teenagers in a Newark high school, they're not going to be talking about anti-racism training. They're going to be probably what they're looking for is economic opportunity and jobs. Why do I say this? Is because you see sort of for lack of a better way of putting it, and by the way, I'm not saying that these things are not important and real.
Right.
But it's an academic take and an academic viewpoint on people's real lives issues, which, by the way, are real, but it's an academic viewpoint on the things that have, and this is the danger with a technocracy, is again, you have educated experts who are taking an academic lens through people's real life problems. It doesn't mean that they're wrong. It doesn't mean that they're not true, but they're a little removed. And I do want to talk about sort of this next point, which is sort of the arts activism. I'm going to skip the education, then come back to that. Arts activism and its backfiring, because you're getting to this. And by the way, look, I hate that I have to say this. You have to say, I think this is all great. I think that a lot of this is good. But think about it this push for inclusion in DEI reflects a technocratic approach, right? In the sense of it is elites, millionaires in Hollywood trying to educate the masses on what the world should be like. I am not saying, again, there are pros and cons to all of this. I am just taking but again, we need to offer a different take in this
Well,
episode.
and again, part of what we're trying to do, just to say, the reason why as you get into this is, what can we learn from the
Exactly.
win in order to, because what do we do here at the Creative Risk Podcast? We're talking about artist sustainability. And part of what we are trying to reflect on is the potential ignoring of signs that could make us irrelevant and less sustainable. Just to say,
100%, and that's and whatever choices you want to make as a result of this are whatever.
live your life.
But live your life. But an example. Let's first talk about sort of how this bureaucratic. Think about since 2020. Think about how many millions of dollars these sort of consultants get paid. These anti-racist consultants, these DEI consultants. And by the way, I have heard from people of color who run organizations that have been consulted by these, that most of them are useless.
Yeah.
But this is an example of a swelling a bureaucratic machine, right? So now to do a play, I have to have, and by the way, I think intimacy coordinators are good, but again, I'm just pointing out a trend. I need to have an intimacy coordinator. I need to have a dramaturg. I need to have a DI consultant. I need to have 17 positions have been created so I can. Now, what does that mean? Joe Rogan could get on a podcast and just talk to you. He could just talk to you, listening, direct to consumer. Auntie can make her TikTok and go right to you, the consumer. Now to put up a play or a fucking movie, there's, again, how many different cooks are in the kitchen, sort of removing it again and morphing it for their own. It is an example of sort of how this move towards social justice, which is fine, fine and good, has created more positions, more bureaucracy, arguably more bloat. I've worked with six intimacy coordinators. One of them was good, I would argue. One of them was actually good. So how much, again, and it hurts the coffers of a theater. It hurts the coffers of a studio.
Well, and I would argue, just to say, I'm not going to say the name of it. But there was a project not too long ago that I worked on where it actually really fucked the process, not just financially, because it was.
I'll bleep it out. Just say it.
Because and again, you and I keep acknowledging the gray area here, because then
There's a lot of nuance.
There is a lot of nuance, a lot of value in the idea, but then put into practice in that specific experience, it completely neutered the work and process, and I would say go as far as not just neutered, actively worked against. And now that has a lot to do with, again, what my point about the virtue signaling and the performative nature of a lot of what we're seeing in the entertainment industry in response to these societal shifts that are progressive. And again, that we might go and like, girl,
and if you're seeing this and doing a play, so now just understand, if you're seeing this in a play in bumfuck nowhere, imagine what it's like in government. Right. Exactly. This is the argument. I'm gonna have I'm gonna have experts come in to consult on all of these different. So you can see how this can lead to, in a thing like government, a lot of issues to an extent. Studios and there's this idea that studios and organizations have introduced measurable diversity standards, treating representation as a quantifiable goal, right? And you're talking about a lot of this was performative, right? Again, as many policies sometimes are, I would argue, take Kamala's, or appeal to black men was like, I'll legalize weed or whatever the fuck. It's like, okay, that was her, like, one of her, like, tent poles for, like, to appeal to black men. And it's like, I'm not saying that that's not useful or good, but again, what deeper issues are you consulting? And now if I'm a viewer at home, and I'll say this because you're a gay person in front of me, it's like, gay people are a minority in the overall country. But when somebody, again, in bumfuck nowhere, watches a movie or TV show and it's a lot of queer elements or stories, that I'm not saying that they can't learn or relate to that, but when that's primarily what it is a queer story. It's not a human story that happens to have queer people or whatever. It's like the queer stories, whatever the fuck. It is difficult. I'm not saying that there's not a place for that, but can you see how there can be resentment that grows among a populace that goes, why am I watching these things that don't apply to my life?
As a queer person who values diversity and progress and has many people in my life for that very reason, I watch things sometimes and I get I this is kind of my point about My Old Ass. That movie, which is that it almost annoys me because I'm like, just tell the story. In fact, I can't wait to tell. Can I just say my comfort food performance now, and we'll talk about it again at the end? Because
sure.
Have you seen Gummo?
No.
It's a movie made in 1997. Chloe Savini. That sort of is very non-narrative. Not really a movie I would really watch. I mean, crazy and extremes and trigger warning. Because I mean the language, there's a whole sequence when they're like paying off some guy to basically rape his sister who has Down syndrome. Like it takes a look at a very impoverished community after a tornado, like in the middle of America. But what is my point? The reason it's my comfort for performance and I'm bringing it up here is because I'm sure you could make a movie like that today, but it is insane. I mean, what real extremes. However, and getting to the performative nature of a lot of work, then why it's so distracting to me. It feels like we're like when I heard I was so I was or I guess it's not announced yet, but whatever. I don't know who the hell cares. I was looking it up and I was trying to find a version of the book that hadn't been changed. Because of some of the language in the original text of Roald Dahl. Because listen, it has nothing to do with me not caring about other people taking and work. And sure, share the changed version for the kids. But that to me is when we start to make art becomes fascist in nature and
manufactured and
manufactured
again, and it's all this red tape. Like even think about the trigger warning. It's like more and more red tape. One view of it is more and more walls to break through. I have to do a land acknowledgement, then I got to do a trigger warning before the fucking play starts. I've already done a play or whatever the fuck. It's like it's all of this sort of inefficiency in one version. Again, it's nuanced. But to make the final point, because I just want to be very clear about what I was saying about diversity and representation. I'm all for it. But people aren't fucking stupid. Somebody, I'll say the name, I'll bleep it out, made a speech because she's on tour right now. And she made a speech after the election, was like, I'm so happy, doing this show below the Mason-Dixon line. It's really an important opportunity to show people a better world in this moment. How do you think those people would feel hearing her say that?
Right. Well, this is
the problem with so much of this representation, DEI stuff, and why there has been a backfiring. Listen, white supremacy may be a part of it. Someone can talk to me about that. I'm sure there's elements to it, of course. But a lot of it has to do with the tone and the also the performative nature of it. It's like we need to educate. We in our elite, coastal elite liberal bubbles need to use art not to entertain, fuck that, who cares, but to educate people.
Right.
And that's called propaganda. Whether you like it or not, that's propaganda. That's what that is. You can say it's positive propaganda or negative propaganda or whatever, but that's propaganda. So we need to use our art as an opportunity and a platform to educate people who are more ignorant than us.
Right.
And so
exactly.
people
And just to-
know
and just to
what is
say,
going on.
Well, I want to say something about that. Again, and by the way, if that's you and you have that opinion, that's what you want your art to do, amazing. But in relation to this idea of what artists can learn, if we are in fact a bit irrelevant in this moment in terms of our main community, and we're trying to share art and grow an audience, you have to go, like, to your point about that person making that speech. It's like, well, okay, so just to be clear, you are basically saying my world, my values are the ones that matter, and other people should have them, and if you don't, you are less than. As opposed to, like, I think the point about women and that abortion and the right to choose was not clearly, because Trump, just to be clear, he improved across the board, including getting 100,000 more votes in New York. And I read a whole article about that the other day. And so then you really have to go, well, so for example, I want to just take that microcosm of an example. Rather than a fuck you, basically, to the whole other side, right? What if we tried to use our work, because I do think there is power in creative work in terms of messaging. What if we used our work to not just go see how beautifully diverse this is, but to have more of a conversation, or at least found ways to let people in where it didn't
to validate their opinions more. I mean, look, I'll tell you what I think the biggest problem is. I think we need to stop. I think we start listening and stop trying to educate or change, or that to me is the moment. Yeah. That to me is what we need to take away, as opposed to trying to educate, force, change the world, show people what it could be as if we know what's better. Maybe we need to do a little more listening, And I'm going to talk about this right now. I think one of the most shameful. I have a friend who teaches at a very expensive liberal arts school in their acting department, which is a very popular acting school. The day, and she's liberal, but she's not like Kool-Aid kind of person. She gets it. She's, daughter of immigrants, and, father is a Trump guy or whatever. So she has a little more of a nuanced take. She walked into her class. She was subbing for another teacher, and she said it was 8 people, and they were all catatonic. Everybody was catatonic the day after the election, crying, beating the table, going, and by the way, she's like, and by the way, nobody did their homework. She was like, this is why, her take was, this is why he won. They didn't do their homework. They had a week to do it. None of them did their homework, and they cry when they lose, and they complain and bitch and moan and victimize themselves, whatever. That was a very specific take. Yeah. However, here's where what I think is shameful. And this extends to universities, and this is why I can't engage with mainstream media now more than ever before, and I don't know how anybody can.
No, and just for what it's worth, that was kind of my point. I was like, I've not been watching her.
Your whole job is to know what's going on in the world. That's your only fucking job as a journalist. And if you are paying, and then to take it to schools, if you are paying $65,000 a year to be in an actively educated zone, you should not be shocked when a Trump election happens. I'm not saying you have to be happy about it, but you shouldn't be. How can you be flabbergasted? How can you justify your students paying that kind of money and them not being educated on how the world works? How can you justify that? And there should be no shock if you are paying $65,000 a year for education. CNN and the New York Times, shame on them. And it shows that they're fucking, it's true. They're fucking, it's bullshit. How can you be shocked at a Trump win? Your whole job is to be informed and to know what's going on. But, and so to me, one of the big lessons to take away from, and by the way, it extends to artists too. If we are supposed to be representing humanity and have our finger on the pulse of what people think and feel, but we're so caught up in our bureaucratic echo chambers, we should be ashamed of ourselves. That I'm not saying you have to be happy. I'm not saying you have to be happy about it, but you should not be shocked. You should know what's going on in fucking humanity. How about that?
Well, this kind of goes back to our episode with Ari Roth when he was fired for wanting to program the Palestinian playwrights at the Jewish Theater. And the reason I say it is because, one of the examples, and we've said it, is like, I wanted the piece of art that represents the January 6th protester. Not because that was a shameful, disgusting, horrible day. I was shocked. And once again, as far as I'm concerned, Trump completely invalidated himself. However, the reason it relates to this is because we shouldn't seek out one kind of story, whether that be news or how the world works or the kind of art. Like, we need to not only, again, this is the point of the episode, not only for our own edification, but we as artists, when I think you said it a great example, representing humanity. Well, only one slice of it.
Well, exactly. Like, and that's the thing is, I'm not saying that you can't afford to be surprised and that whatever, but like, you should be, if you are shocked by Trump's win, and by the way, I was very surprised, we need to do some major questioning. Because maybe we're too focused on, again, with our art, trying to put out the worldview that we want to be and not doing enough listening or understanding or looking at what's going on. And, that's the thing is, some people are going to have different opinions. Some people are going to believe that the point of their art is to change the world and to, a kind of, a good way to say it would be change the world for the better and to show people what's possible. That's the positive spin. The other spin it would be to force your worldview on everybody else. That's another version you can take. Both are true. Or you can view this moment as art making as a chance to sort of ground yourself a little bit more in the full scope of humanity here, and not just being part of to be clear and think about it. Again, what disturbs, you get educated, you can see the track. You go to, North Carolina School of the Arts, you get indoctrinated by your teachers on certain beliefs. Then you go see theater in New York that indoctrinates you into more beliefs. And then you're performing that kind of theater because you think you should have. You're indoctrinated even more. And then you watch all the same shit that everybody else is watching. You're indoctrinated even more. This is how. And so I think the number one thing that we all need to be thinking about is, how are we breaking out of our bubbles? That's my opinion. How are we breaking out of our bubbles?
Well,
You
because
know,
it kind of takes
Yeah.
us into like what you. I'm not quite sure where we are here in this.
yeah, let's do
topic,
strategy.
but-
I think we're at the you know,
Yeah. Well,
I
because
do want to talk
think-
about the lateral versus linear thinking thing, but maybe briefly.
No, let's
but-
do it. Let's do it. But I think again, part of what this will tie in with it is framing. Okay, so then what does that mean for us in the future? If the mainstream media across the board, it does not carry the same importance it once did. If people are looking for more representation, ironically, I say that, meaning not
Again, it's
just
gray. It's gray.
Of course.
It is true. There is more representation. It's a different kind of representation. It's not, again, that's why I use the framework of technocracy versus populism. This is why, again, there's a million frameworks through which you could view this. You can have a very inclusive, diverse CNN panel, but it's fucking CNN. So it's one fucking dictated elitist viewpoint. It
Right.
doesn't matter. You could have a bunch of people in front of the camera who look different, but is it, so the representation looks like different things. And from this framework, it looks like something different. One thing I do want to point out, and this to me is major in this moment. There's this guy, David Murin, who's a global forecaster, who's really well respected. And he's discussed this, this idea of lateral thinkers versus linear thinkers. And when institutions are strong, linear thinkers do better. So linear thinkers do better with stable environments, traditional rules, and strategic processes. So they avoid innovation and they sort of stick to the blueprint. So, a linear thinker is someone who goes, a perfect example in our industry is, I'm going to go to Juilliard, and then I am going to graduate and have a showcase, and then I am going to get an agent, and then I will start by doing co-stars, and then I'll do a guest star, and then I'll get a series, whatever the fuck it is, right? So when institutions are very strong and those sort of processes are very clear, linear thinkers can do well.
Yeah.
However, they're not going to be innovating because they're going to be playing by the numbers too much, right? And he didn't talk about this in relation to acting, but it's all the same thing. Again, and the reason why you can't come up with innovative solutions is because, again, you are, as opposed to, a perfect example of sort of this iterative feedback is like, well, I know I need to do social media, but how is that going to help me get an agent? You still can't break out of this, even if you do try to invite a little innovation in and adaptability in, you are still stuck in sort of an increasingly irrelevant linear system that doesn't make any sense, right? So this is now lateral thinkers are more adaptive, they're more entrepreneurial. Again, the big risk is that it's much riskier because you are having to build your own sort of systems. These kind of thinkers do better when institutions are weaker and untrusted, as they can forge new pathways and avenues for success. So This is why TikTok stars can get fucking movies. It's because they are not, because when Hollywood is weak and does not have a monopoly on entertainment or influence or information anymore, and it has become more democratized, right?
That's social
It is
media.
easier for people to find ways to get some of that information and that influence and that entertainment capital, right? And I have to say this because you said this in the beginning, and it is a great point. These lateral thinkers are often looked on with disdain at first. A TikTok influencer has no business being an actor, but invariably, as institutions weaken, these institutions will adapt to these more lateral, innovative thinkers.
Because they're looking towards the future, and they're subsequently, and one could argue, shaping it. And again, that is where we ironically need to be listening to this moment, learning from it in order to survive the future, rather than, let's be clear, holding on to what clearly wasn't working.
Well, this goes to the next, like, here's the number one thing, in addition to listening, that I think that we need to take away from this moment. And I said this in a weekly Get At It. The first real challenge might be to let go.
Our little like mini episodes of Creative Risk
on
that you
Patreon.
can access on Patreon.
Yeah. The first real challenge might be to let go. Assume success within the industry would never happen. What would you do? What if you assumed you were to never book a job again? You were to never get, now you might disagree with some of this, but what if, when we're talking about true innovation here, true self-sufficiency, true all of the values you and I hold dear, whether it's audience growth, whatever the fuck, self-producing, what if you first assumed that you were never going to book again? You know, as an exercise, what would you do? Well, the first thing I think would become clear is you would get clear on motivation. Why are you really in this? Are you in it for the art? Because again, the business is not the art, right? So it kind of goes, if Hollywood and Broadway disappeared tomorrow, or you assumed you were never going to be let into those spaces, again, what was really important to me? Was it the art or was it the fame? Was it, to actually provide entertainment and value to people, or was it to be accepted, which is what I think actually is my big problem, is I desperately want to be accepted by this elite and by these people and these communities. So if I assumed that they went away or I was never going to be let in the door, do I care enough about the art itself to try and figure it out on my own? I think that I think that this is a really strong question to ask yourself is, what would I do if I assumed I was either never going to book again or never be let into the doors? And what would I do? What would I do? And getting clear about that. I don't know if you have any response to that part.
Well, it's just funny you say that, because I sat down with this girl from a college that I had done a show at. They did a show of mine anyway, doesn't matter. I sat down with her. She wanted some advice. She's super, super talented, and it relates to this. Been super, super talented. I mean, like freakishly talented. Can't get an agent. It's been a couple of years. Really just been struggling. And I said to her, I said, who is your art for? Go find them. Go build an audience.
Exactly.
Go build your own relevance if you feel like you're not being chosen. And the look of she was so dismayed by it, because just to be clear, we of course, as we've often talked about, we all want to be chosen. We want the phone to ring and people to say, "Hey," to your point about being
and
let
validation
in.
from the community and all of that. But what's insane? Sorry, go.
Well, no, just that this is the point, because she was not interested in having to take the bull by the horns. But just to underline these questions that you're posing is the idea, by the way, that our system as we know it, the entertainment world, is becoming irrelevant. And
you are desperately knocking on the door of a house that is burning to the ground. You are trying to be let in to a house that is being, and this is why I get frustrated with myself, because it feels so much easier to, even though it's irrelevant and all of this is true, to do that than actually innovate and build something on your own.
Yes.
So, that to me is a large element. What if you did that? Another thing I just want to point out is, if we assumed we were never going to be part of the industry again, we wouldn't give a shit what people think. We wouldn't give up. And here's what I mean by that. This is what prevents us from making art and monetizing it, right? It's like, what prevents us from making art and monetizing it to an extent is, that's going to be mainly through social media, right? That's going to be mainly through growing a digital presence. And, but so many times we're scared to do that because we're afraid that a casting director or another actor is going to judge us. Oh, he must be desperate. Why is he doing that? Oh, why is he making that? Why is he doing that? The stigma is starting to go away, but it's still very present in terms of like and the benefit of assuming that you would never work again, or that this industry is never going to let you in, or that this industry is going to be gone in 5 years. You wouldn't be so concerned about what these fucking industry people think about you, and you would be more concerned with what audiences think about you, which
Right.
is more fucking relevant. I also think, yeah, basically we're afraid of what these cool artsy fartsy people think about us, as opposed to what an audience thinks about us, which is absolutely insane.
I see you even have the Nicole. I was going to be saying this next, actually, the Scherzinger thing.
Well, let me say this. We may also be, in relation to this, if we assumed that we weren't going to be accepted by the industry, we may be less likely to self-censor ourselves, and per your point, kind of potentially dull our point of views, which is what we are selling, because we don't give a shit about backlash, right? And by that I mean, so many people are afraid to express themselves in this moment in our community. I see it all the time. People are afraid of saying the wrong things.
Too.
I'm terrified of it.
Yeah.
And how can you make creative art in a world where you are, but if you don't give a shit, I don't give a shit who cares what, even, I'm going to say something fucked up, what theater fans think? What's that, 1% of the fucking population? Who cares? Who cares what a bunch of fucking message board theater fans have to say? And instead, let me go, well, how would I get people, find new theater fans or new people to come, right? But if we were sort of letting go of this idea of the industry accepting us, we would be less afraid of backlash. Now say what you're going to say about the Nicole thing.
Well, two things, because it relates to, but let me just say, this is a great, this is the lateral thinking you're talking about. And don't we want to be innovators? And don't we want to, again, reflect on this moment where the message loud and clear is that something isn't speaking to the masses, and therefore, what is the purpose of our work and what's it for? But the Nicole Scherzinger thing that's fascinating is, so for those of you who don't know, she posted a picture, or she commented on a picture of a hat that, what's his name? Russell Brand was wearing, that said, "Make Jesus first again." But it was in the style of the Trump's "Make America Great Again." And she wrote something like, "Oh my God, where can I get this hat?" And people flipped out for a couple of reasons. One, because the hat was red and white with the white lettering, and oh my God, is she a Trump supporter? Secondly, and this one's crazy to me, that and I find, and by the way, this is from a very non-religious person, and I do actually think organized religion in a lot of ways is hilarious to me, because the fact that stories, these kinds of stories, pit people against, they kill it because of these made-up stories, is wild. But the fact that believers and faith-driven individuals are villainized, especially in our industry, is another example of hello, what are you doing? Oh, we're so accepting. What if she's just a faith-driven person? And you know what if she was a Trump supporter? Again, not my cup of tea, but for us to go but here's my problem. She kowtowed.
Right.
She kowtowed. I'm so, and look, I'm not saying if that was me, if I was in her position, I might say something that was a more communal message of, sorry if I offended anybody, that wasn't my intention, but my beliefs are my beliefs and they don't have to be yours. That's it. It's like, oh, this is what kills me. Just assuming that the whole, we've got to all think exactly alike, and if we don't, there's something wrong with us, is absolutely insane. Do you know what I mean? That to me is just,
and you know what's crazy?
wild.
Here's what's wild to me.
What
she doesn't get. Here's what she doesn't know. If she came out and said basically what you just said, maybe even with a little more bite, I would be like, I got to see that bitch in that show. Not because I agree with Make Jesus First Again, but there are so many people in our community, actually, who didn't want her to kowtow, I am sure, not because they're Trump supporters, but because they're sick of this. They're sick of this cancellation, this uniformity of thought. And I bet you, I actually completely I think that what we can't see, again, lateral thinking, is she probably would have brought new people to the theater. She probably would have brought new people to the theater because that would have gotten press and people would have been like, fuck yeah, dude. And I would be like her biggest fan. Again, not because I agree with the politics, but because I'm like, fuck yeah, don't fucking bow to this fucking, fascist agenda. And I'd be like, let's go, bitch. Like, but that's the thing, is we're so stuck.
Right.
Again, in sort of how we think it's all working. And by the way, I do not think I'm alone in that. You just said you would have had a lot more respect for her, and probably would have been a bigger fan
because
as someone who disagrees with her.
Because my lens, as we explore this topic specifically, isn't about my, and I would argue your, political beliefs or standings. It has more to do with two things as far as I'm concerned. Being open to other people believing other things and accepting that and not villainizing them for it, even if those things might hurt my feelings. That's I believe in autonomy. I believe in freedom of thought and expression. That's what we are as a country, and therefore to try to, and thank God cancel culture is somewhat sort of waning off now, because I think that was, I would argue played into his win too, by the way. I think people are sick of that. But the other thing, again, and what we're trying to do, and what can we learn from this moment in Trump's win, is going, well, and what's my role as in my career as an artist, to quote, whether it's to, like you're saying, represent humanity or just to pay my fucking bills. I'm going, okay, well, wait a second. Maybe I don't, maybe you bring up a good point. Her message actually brings more people in. That's a positive thing too, just from a business standpoint as well.
But again, this is why I use the technocracy label, is because it's like, oh, well, we're better. We know more.
Right.
This is why Trump won, in my opinion. It's because there is a group of people in this country saying, we know better than you. We know more than you. You're uneducated. You don't understand. You don't actually know what's important in the world. And we know from our bubbles.
And let us tell you, and here's how you should vote.
Let me raise one practical, before we sort of wrap this up a bit. Two practical, really strong. This to me is probably one of the biggest things to take away. Again, this informs our branding. Here's what I mean: leading more with persona than our job. Nobody gives this, as technocracy falls, nobody cares about specialization. Nobody cares. Nobody cares about your niche, that I am the expert in blah, or I am an actor. People are more interested in people than they are ever before. So I think from a branding perspective, what this means for actors and artists is, stop leading with this sort of niche industry shit, like your training, your type, your craft, your reps, putting that in your bio, and or even like your bookings or your theater interests. And instead, you need to start to, in my opinion, again, if you want to take anything from sort of what we can learn from, and again, you don't have to do any of this, whatever. But I think that there is, again, all of these, think about the alternative media that's rising. These aren't Joe Rogan, he's a comedian, but he's really just like a dude who's interested in the world.
Right.
Theo Von is just a dude, they're comedians, but they're not like telling, it's not like I'm a comedian, so I need to tell jokes on my podcast.
Right.
It's like they're leading with their personas and their personalities. And I would argue that it is becoming less and less sexy to be a specialist in something and more interesting to be an interesting person. There's this woman who we teach, I won't name her, but there's this woman who we at the university we just taught. She's I think composer, actor, but she also has a baking company. And what would be some traditional sort of orthodox advice? Well, don't include the baking stuff. What does that have to do with anything with your? I don't think that's true anymore. I think that this is changing. People want well-rounded, interesting, diverse people. Interesting people. So it's like, I think this means exploring your diverse interests and finding a platform for those interests as well. Yeah, if you're an actor but you're also a gardener and you also take taekwondo, that's infinitely more interesting than, again, a specialist in a bureaucratic system that applies nothing to me. If I'm somebody in bumfuck Idaho, I don't care about your booking on Law and Order SVU, and I don't care about your fucking, that is what do I know about all of that? I don't know anything about that fucking world, and it's not interesting to me. But if you're an actor and you're also a gardener and you take taekwondo and you whatever, do silly sketch it, now this is more entertaining. This is something more relatable. So I think that a big lesson to take away from this is branding, is leading more with a persona brand than with a specialized sort of niche brand, if that makes sense.
Makes total sense.
I don't know if you agree with that.
I do. Well, you know what I was thinking about while you were talking was how actually cutting edge so much of our work has been for a decade, because this is, I would argue, so much of whether it's certainly the death of specialization, which we're going to do a whole episode on at some point, but reconsidering what our roles are as artists and even our marketing work, and just thinking about, this is built into what we promote. If you've been listening to the podcast for a while, this can't be a shock to you, because when we're looking at this through the lens of fundraising or trying to grow an audience or even build relationships, we are encouraging folks to think outside the box. And I think that this election and it's putting into question the relevance of our work, of
our industry. And this is the final thing I want to say very quickly, is where I think you and I do give ourselves credit, is what we have been talking about more and more, is all people talk about actor or artist. It's all like how to get casting directors to notice you, how to get so-and-so. And again, that is the equivalent of a DC echo chamber.
Right.
You're not trying to reach people. You're trying to reach an industry. You're trying to reach a bureaucratic, irrelevant system. And so the final thing to really think about here is, who's your audience, really?
Exactly. Well, it's so
Who
funny
is
you
your
say
audience?
that. That's exactly what I was going to say, is like, if nothing else, if you take nothing else away from this episode, and I do want to say, I want to take 2 points about audience.
Yeah.
So let me lose the thought, but I do want to take a moment to acknowledge, and I'm not being two-faced here, given what this whole episode is about. But I do think it's important, Mike, that we acknowledge that these are our opinions. We know that, and our perspectives as 2 white men in the industry too.
Oh, sure, of course.
Just to say, and the reason I'm saying it is because I do think
that
our experience and perspectives, and
again, this is the framework we decided to view it from today.
Exactly, and in reflection of the outcome of the election, I think that much of our lives will not change, honestly.
100%.
And so just saying,
I'm scared for women. Again, from what my belief structure is, I talk about this in the weekly Get At It. I am scared about, I hope that a national abortion referendum doesn't happen. That's my biggest fear, to be honest with you, is that. But
well, I just to say that, but you actually just sort of hit the nail on the head. And this is why I'm saying, I think this is what a lot of what we talk about already sort of flows into this idea of like, who are you trying to reach and for what purpose? It's what you're going back to your why. You are an artist. Why? And who is your art for? Your art is not for that one producer or maybe it is, but assumedly you are making art for other people, for audiences, and if nothing else, doing an audit on your focus and priorities in terms of who you're trying to reach could be a really valuable, actionable next step.
And yeah, I think that's great. And understand, because look, you may sit here and you may say, look,
You may shit here.
you may shit here, you may shit, but you may sit here and you may go, I only care about the New York theater scene and what they think of me. That is my audience. It's my fellow actors. It's my fellow artists. It's my fellow casting. It's my fellow. It's all of the. That is all I care about, and that is my audience. Wonderful. Acknowledge the consequences of that.
Yeah. Or
Don't expect. Therefore, to actually make a difference. In the larger scheme. Don't expect to really reach people. Don't expect it. Don't expect for your art to really make a difference if all you really care about is your small community of artists and your work being valued by them. And I speak as someone because, look, the last question I want to end this on is, what are we taking away from this moment now in terms of how we need to change? This is the hardest part for me. All I want is to be accepted by this fucking community. All I want is for New York Theater Workshop to cast me in a fucking whatever. That's all I want. Right. And it's scary to let go of that. Not because I don't think it's possible but because it's not smart business sense. Frankly, it's not smart business sense. And so, if I really had a set of balls on me, I really, the one thing I really need to start challenging myself to do is, yes, continue to try and get bookings because that helps pay, and it's better to do that than other shit. So bookings are important, don't get me wrong, but really practically and macro picture, big game, going, what if I assumed that this business was going to burn to the ground in 5 years? What would I do? How would I make art? How would I monetize it? How would I grow an audience around it? I mean, and, like I said, it's better to be doing a show than not. It's better. The short-term bookings are not something to let go of, but that is not a long-term career plan at this point. I really don't believe it. I really do not. And it terrifies me that I am going to be left behind in this moment because I am not willing to let go of all of this other shit when I know that it's not actually that relevant anymore.
Yeah,
so,
well, I think you're just to answer. I think the question is, the two things for me come back to social media specifically in terms of a consideration of growing an owned audience, which I have done so slowly and so incrementally. I talk about that openly, but it's present for me, and I'm fully aware of its need. The other thing, though, just to say creatively, is I would really like to be part of creative work that is telling different stories, both different, necessary, diverse stories that promote progressive, inclusive ideals, and also stories that we don't like. All these stories, like the story of the woman who prefers who's more stressed about the cost of milk than she is about her right to choose. Like, why? Where does that come from for you? And what is that story? And that is interesting to me because I think it's we're getting so much of the other that I think it's important to continue to see a cornucopia of creative output. So what does that mean for me exactly, Mike? I don't know. But I don't know if that even relates to socials at all, but I do know that it's something that I'm interested in. And actually, it's a good segue into comfort food performances again.
Yep.
Because again, I think that Gummo, it was truly a shocking movie to me. has always been considered a bit of a cult film and a fringe film unto itself. You can watch it on a website called effedupmovies.com, EFFED upmovies.com. I'm saying it because it's not streaming any. I mean, it's that crazy. And again, trigger warning, indeed. But what was fascinating is I don't see art like that. I don't see art about such impoverished, ignorant communities that, because they're not, to your point, and that's why I think it ties in with this episode. They're not. No one in that community was watching Succession for sure. So Gummo, to me, just because it's a piece of art, I was so taken with its point of view and clarity in a very it was found footage mixed in with kind of light storytelling, but yet it was very clear and tracked all the way through. Period. That's my comfort food performance.
I decided it before we started recording, and I forgot what it was.
Tom Cruise.
Well, to sort of take this populist edge, I would say a comfort food performance of mine. It's funny. I'll say Tim Dillon's podcast. I really want to see just Tim Dillon in general. I don't agree with all his politics, but, it's funny because it's an example of I think he's the best satirist we have in this moment. I think nobody's doing it, but then again, this is a perfect example. This is a guy who has millions of listeners every month. He's never going to get the Mark Twain Satirist Award from instead whoever the fuck from stupid. And by the way, so sorry. Can we stop with SNL? Can SNL end? What's the point of SNL anymore? But it's a perfect example of what are you doing? You don't speak to anything anymore. It's again, echo chamber. Anyway, whatever. But he's not. I would say Tim Dillon, and then kind of to use another example, Shane Gillis's stand-up, Beautiful Dogs. I don't know. Have you watched it? Mm-mm. Oh, and it's so good. This was a guy who was kicked off of SNL. He was at SNL and then got kicked off because of some tweets, I guess he said, that were racist coded or whatever, but they were jokes. And, the industry completely rejected him. And he became one of the most famous comedians on the planet. Basically, grew a massive podcast. He has a TV show on Netflix now. They brought him back to host SNL. And it's an example of, again, it's a perfect example of someone who, it just shows that it's irrelevant. It's irrelevant. They went back to him because he was relevant. Mm-hmm. And so, again, I hope that this gives us, if anything, I hope that this instills people with a sense of, yes, politically, we can all be afraid, whatever. I choose to try, and I'm going to choose the same thing you're going to do, which is I'm going to try and see the positives. I'm going to try and give him a fair shake. That's the choice. I'm in hope for the best. But I hope that we can just see in this moment that when you let go of these old systems, you can really create something special, and that you have the ability to do that. Period. Okay.
Bye. Bye, folks.
Bye. Hey, thanks for tuning in to this episode of Creative Risk. If you've enjoyed, please don't forget to subscribe here on YouTube, follow our channel, or follow us on your favorite podcast app. A quick review on Apple Podcasts, like we said, would mean the world to us. We read them all, as I said. And if you want to go deeper, join our Patreon community starting at just $5 a month for exclusive content, motivation, and a supportive community. Check out patreon.com/Creative Risk Podcast, and we'll see you next time.